Hello, and welcome to another episode of 8 Days of Diana Wynne Jones. I'm Rebecca Framo.
I'm Emily Tesh, and this week we introduce our wonderful special guest, Freya Marske.
Hello, I am delighted to be here.
Thank you so much for coming and being our Howl's Moving Castle expert, our romance expert for this most romantic Diana Wynne Jones book.
Well, thank you for agreeing to humor me when I barged into your space and said, if you're doing Howl's Moving Castle, you have to let me talk.
Yes,
and
we
very,
did.
Very
we
kindly
do.
agreed.
All right, so before we start talking about the book, tell us why you barged into our space and said Howl's Moving Castle.
So Howl's Moving Castle is, if not my favorite book of all time, one of my favorite books of all time. I have 2 copies of it, one of it to lend out to people who I'm trying to inflict it on, and one that lives on my bedside table, and I read it when I can't sleep or when I'm sick. So I reread it at least twice a year, and have done since I first read it. So I know it very, very well, and I have a lot of opinions about it.
Yes.
And how about Diana Wynne Jones in general? Were you much of a Jones reader or just a Howl's Moving Castle reader?
They sort of happened simultaneously for me. So I wish I had grown up reading these books. I did grow up reading quite a lot of the sort of British kids fantasy like E. Nesbit and a lot of the other stuff that Wynne Jones herself actually references, because my mother is British and she handed on a lot of the books that she had read as a kid. But we could not get these books here. I was not aware that Diana Wynne Jones existed as a writer until I discovered Howl's Moving Castle. And I vividly know the year it was that was the year of Diana Wynne Jones for me. It was when I was 24 and I was in my 4th year of medical school. And I did my 4th year of medical school in a town in New South Wales called Orange, of which I can only assume the librarian is the one Diana Wynne Jones fan in Australia, because the library had this huge selection of her books, and I have never seen that much Diana Wynne Jones anywhere in Australia before or since. There were a couple of re-releases of Howl's Moving Castle when the film came out, and other than that, I've had to piece together my collection whenever I'm overseas. Sometimes it pops up in weird secondhand places. Very occasionally I'll find some kind of magical unicorn new edition in a random bookshop and snap it up. And then when you started this podcast, I immediately ordered all the other ones that I had never been able to find at great expense from secondhand bookstores.
It's been such a an extra little bonus delight for me of doing the podcast is every time we get to one that you haven't read and then we get to talk to you about it because you're reading it for the first time.
Yeah, well, I think because I really just read whatever the library had. I remember because, they're quite easy to get through for an adult reader, I would just go to the library at some point and, I was at medical school, I was doing a lot of study, and then Saturday or Sunday would hit and I would just lie on the couch and read an entire Diana Wynne Jones book in a day or an afternoon.
Oh, that's perfect.
And then go back to the library, and I used the library as a study hub, and I would just exchange it for the next Diana Wynne Jones book that I hadn't read. But I became extremely attached to Howl's Moving Castle. I picked it up first because it was one that I had seen people talk about. It may have been you, Becca. I don't know. It was someone. And so I picked it up first and became immediately obsessed with it.
Why are you obsessed with it? Tell us why you're obsessed with it.
I'm obsessed with it because it's a romance, number one. And I think it possibly gave me unrealistic expectations about Diana Wynne Jones and romance in general, because I think it is an
I will say, this is the thing, because people recommend Howl as like, you haven't read Diana Wynne Jones, read Howl's Moving Castle, which is great, but it's not representative.
Oh no, not at all.
No.
I mean, luckily, I think part of what I liked about it was I immediately saw in Diana Wynne Jones some things to do with story that I really loved and that I really admired as a writer, especially to do with where she begins and ends her stories, which we can talk about.
Definitely.
But I think part of it was the romance. Part of it was also obviously that it's such a self-aware fairy tale, and I love anything that is a very self-aware fairy tale or something that's in the fairy tale genre while interrogating the fairy tale genre. So I like that aspect of it as well. And of course, if you like that, then there's a lot more for you in the other books.
Definitely. And I do think, so I think that Howl's Moving Castle is actually, since, doing this chronological project has been really interesting, because this is almost, I think, the first time that she's doing this particular thing that she's doing in Howl's Moving Castle. It won't be the last, but I think it might be the first, where she is building a world out of fairy tales in a very particular way.
She's going from the start fully metafictional at this point, in a way that she hasn't really before. She's always been playing with the underlying metafiction, the trope, the genre. Charmed Life is a gothic romance done inside out and back to front. But
and so maybe it's Howl's Moving Castle.
Right, so it is. But Howl's Moving Castle, Howl as Gwendolyn? I'm going to come back to that. But Howl's Moving Castle is so purely built on trope, on story, on playing with how stories work and how stories function, that even like magic within the book functions in the way of who's telling the story and how are they telling it and where are the words coming from. I have an unpopular opinion on Howl's Moving Castle. In fact, or rather I did, and then I reread it.
Yes.
So I want to give you like two. I'm going to give you M of 2 days ago, because I had to read this very quickly because I was doing a panel at a con on Narnia and had to hold all of Narnia in my head until after the panel. But I was like, okay, Howl. Right, but 2 days ago, I would have said my unpopular opinion on Howl's Moving Castle is I think Howl's Moving Castle is mid. I know. Or rather, as a Diana Wynne Jones. If any other author had written that, I'd be like, whoa, what a good book. What else have you done? As a Jones, I'm like, well, it's not in my top 5. It's not even in my top 5 this decade. But that actually says more to what an absolutely banger decade the 80s is in Jones's output. And also, then I reread it and I was like, Em, you're just being an edgy bitch. The book is extremely good. It's not the book's fault that it's popular.
I was going to say, I just listened to the rough cut of your Fire and Hemlock episode, having just done a Fire and Hemlock reread, and my main note was, Fire and Hemlock fails spectacularly as a romance.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
Oh, 1,000.
But it's interesting
I call that one mid, but I remember I was reading it, I was like, Diana, you're not there yet. You haven't worked it out.
But it's interesting, actually, to read Fire and Hemlock and Howl back to back.
Oh, absolutely.
She wrote them back to back, and these are two books that are organised around a relationship. Romance with Fire and Hemlock is a big question mark, but relationship, definitely. If I wrote Fire and Hemlock, and I got, and this is a quote, a review that said, this is a girl's book and I don't see why I should have to understand it. And then the following year, I brought out Howl's Moving Castle, and it was Howl that got all the success and admiration, I would actually be furious. Because to me, it does feel like, that was a tough one. Deep breath, time for something fun.
I mean, look, those of us who write for a living, but also those of us who have written fan fiction, this is the way it goes. You know, you write your 60,000-word epic that you pour your heart and soul into, thematically dense, well plotted, doing some interesting experimental stuff, and then you get drunk one night and write 2,000 words of crack, and everyone's like, oh my god, kudos, 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 this is the one.
Okay. Part of which is often that sort of uninhibited 2,000 words of crap one is the funny one. And gosh, people love jokes, and Howl is so funny. It's so much fun.
It is.
Yeah, and you can see why it would be the one that is popular versus Fire and Hemlock, which, as you point out, is a scholar's dream. But I feel like middle grade author Diana Wynne Jones, she was writing for the scholars. The publishers were probably like, thank fuck something commercial when the next one came out.
And it is, like, if there is a book that is the most popular Diana Wynne Jones book, it is Howl's Moving Castle, because it plays all the hits. It's extremely funny. It is possibly her funniest book. It is the one where she cracks romance for the first time. Like, she's trying to do it here for the first time. Like, none of her other books to this point have really been about romance in this way. She's sort of moved towards being able to write that. And then it's Fire and Hemlock and Howl's Moving Castle back to back. What is it about how people fall in love? How do they do that? Let's look at this.
Well, I mean, part of the appeal for me is also like you can come at it as a scholar of fairy tale, because you're right. What Diana Wynne Jones does so well is these people who learn how to solve the story by knowing what story they're in. Sophie thinks she knows the story she's in. Page one, she's like, this is
hang on. I'm going to read the opening of the book. It's so important. So the book starts out, in the land of Ingery, where such things as 7-league boots and cloaks of invisibility really exist, it is quite a misfortune to be born the eldest of 3. Everyone knows you are the one who will fail first and worst if the 3 of you set out to seek your fortune. And what I love about this opening and how it plays into the rest of the book is, first of all, it sets up where we are. We're in fairy tale land. There are fairy tale rules. And it reads as objective, which it isn't.
No, but what you realize later is that it tells you something about Sophie, in that Sophie accepts what people tell her as truth.
Yes.
Even though she's young enough to be quite accepting of what people tell her, she comes across as crabby and maybe a little bit cynical, but she is not in any way. So when she begins the story, she does not recognize that she's in a combination of Beauty and the Beast and the Snow Queen. She thinks for a while that she's in Bluebeard, which is quite fun, where she's hunting around the castle for bits of killed women. She's like, where are they?
It's so funny. It's Sophie is trying to figure out what story she's in for the entire book, and she is so annoyed when she finds out.
Yeah, because if she was the youngest sister, she would recognize it as Beauty and the Beast. That she has left her 2 other sisters and gone into the dark house where you are not allowed to go into certain rooms of the house, and there is a magical secret to do with the soul of the master. But she's like, no.
Which is Cupid and Psyche as well, which is the underlying romance of Fire and Hemlock.
But she can't recognize it because she's like, that's stupid. I wouldn't get that kind of story. I'm the oldest.
Right. I don't get a story at all. That's not my story. I am a background character, is what Sophie says to herself. And she goes into everything with that particular, mindset, which I am a background character. Even when she sets off to seek her fortune. And she, the book begins, Sophie is background character, eldest sister, her father dies, her younger sisters get... Well, we should probably talk about the setup.
I think we should, because I think this is a very Jonesian family, and in fact, it's one we've seen before. It's a family with a mother and father and siblings, and Jones is always very interested in sibling relationships, and Sophie is the eldest of 3 sisters, and at this point, the alarm bells go off, because we all read Time of the Ghost, which has 4 sisters, but Becca and I argued that actually the eldest 2 are 1, and Jones was herself the eldest of 3 sisters. And is constantly doing little autobiographical bits here and there. So Sophie is the eldest of 3. She has a strong-minded middle sister and a tantrum-having, enormously selfish younger sister. And she has a stepmother. And you're like, okay, we're in a fairy story. Stepmothers, right. But her stepmother, Fanny, is a really lovely person. Or that's how Sophie sees her at the start of the book. Fanny is trying really hard to take care of the girls, so she arranges apprenticeships for them that make sense. Martha, who's the youngest, who obviously is going to seek her fortune successfully, gets apprenticed to a witch so she can learn magic for fortune-seeking purposes. Letty, the beautiful middle sister, gets placed at a bakery where she can meet lots of boys, so she can get married and live happily ever after early on. And Sophie, as the eldest, gets to inherit the family business that was her father's before he died, which is the hat shop. So Sophie, at the start of the book, is working in a hat shop, and she is miserable. And she never acknowledges directly that she's miserable. You have to read how she's written about, how she writes about herself. But there's a description of her going to visit her sister early on. I was like, oh, you poor... She dresses all in grey. She hides in the shadows when she walks through the street. She's scared of people. She doesn't know why. And you can see that the life is being crushed out of Sophie by this hat shop job that she hates, where all she ever does is talk to the hats that she's decorating and tell them about the fantasy lives they ought to live, which are pretty clearly the fantasy lives that Sophie wishes she was living. A different story, please, any story.
Yeah. I think that so Sophie's particular gift, I think, and we're going to get into this, is she talks to things. She talks to things around here. And one of the things I was noticing really when I was rereading this is that she is so desperate for a story, as you say, that she looks at everything around her and is like, wow, it's just like me for real. Like, she looks at a hat and she's like, yeah, this hat, you could be a little fancier. I'm gonna make you up nice, and then you're gonna have a fun time. She looks at a scarecrow in a hedge and is like, wow, I feel like that scarecrow. She looks at a skull and is like, man, I feel like that skull. And so she talks to the things around her, and as we will eventually learn, gives them a little bit of the story for real, because that's how this world works. Is Sophie can
she
talk
sees herself
story
in
into
all the
things.
characters, but you're right that when it's in narration, it's very often an inanimate object, and it's very clearly that I see myself as scenery, but I really want to break free of being scenery.
Yes, you're so right.
I'm giving the opportunity
Yes.
for life to all of these inanimate things around me because I can't give it to myself, or I think I can't give it to myself. And when she does give it to herself, it is sidelong and without being aware of it, which is the inciting incident of the book.
Yes. Yeah, Sophie is never aware of the ways in which... So, Sophie, the point of view control, as we've talked about point of view control in previous books, in Howl's Moving Castle is perfect. Because Sophie is so right about so many things and so wrong about herself 95% of the time.
And also, I do find it exquisitely funny that Sophie is just like me for real about everything except Howl himself.
Ooh.
And he's just like her, for real.
Yes.
Because this book is very much doing that mirror self, that here's the other me, that discovery of the other person you are. And I think it's full-on romantic in Howl's Moving Castle. Sophie and Howl have so much in common. There's so much that echoes in them, and I think actually also both of them are so much echoed and mirrored by Calcifer the Fire Demon. And it's great.
Yeah.
And it is very romantic.
Yeah, I have a whole thing about... So, like, my entire page of notes about this is romance, comma, and Howl says self. And then it's just dot points for 2 pages. So just, just pull the trigger on me whenever you want. And we'll go.
All right, let's get Sophie into the house, and then I want to pull the trigger on the house. So, to get Sophie into the house, before she gets to the house, she has to get cursed, because she can't bring herself to leave the hat shop and leave her assumed destiny until something gives her the excuse. And what gives her the excuse is the evil Witch of the Waste, who has been lurking on the outskirts, threatening the town vaguely, sails into the hat shop and says, "You've done something terrible to my plans, Miss Hatter, and now I'm going to get revenge upon you," and places a curse on her and turns her into an old woman, and then leaves. Sophie has no idea why this has happened or what she could possibly have done to offend the obvious villain of the story that is Ingery. But now she's old, and she doesn't want her stepmother's going to worry, her sisters are going to worry, she doesn't want any of them to worry about this. So now that something has happened to her, the only thing that there is to do is to go off and seek her fortune, which is what happens when someone puts a spell on you. And so she hobbles away down the street, feeling very calm because she's in a state of shock about being turned into a 90-year-old woman. And has a couple of significant encounters with things that are going to be, with inanimate objects, with parts of the scenery that are going to be important later in the story. And finally finds her way to the other obvious villain of the story, the evil wizard Howl, who lives in a moving castle that chugs its way around her town and is rumored to eat the hearts of girls. She's like, well, this might as well happen.
Yeah, and again, it's that point of view control, because she's like, I don't know where I'm going. I'm just wandering up into the woods. I don't know where I'm going.
But there's nothing else up there except the castle.
But then, as far as she's concerned, she's like, oh no, it's just that I'm tired and need somewhere to rest. And I guess it seems that the only place for me to possibly find shelter is this moving castle that I well know is the only thing up here where I have been walking all day. Like and then later on she judges Howl for only being able to do things by telling himself that he's not doing them.
Yes. That is how she works. I'm like reading this like, why are you going up into the hills? It's 9:00 at night. You're so tired and you're walking up.
I've got to point out, before she does that, before she's been turned old, there is a meet cute first. Before she's been turned to an old woman, we do actually encounter the evil wizard Howl out and about trying to seduce girls and eat their hearts, Sophie does not recognize him because he seems like just a guy. A very handsome, very friendly guy who singles her out as she's scurrying through the streets trying to hide from everyone on sort of the unhappiest days of her life and tries to take her to buy her a drink, which Sophie refuses and runs away from him. I remember in the movie adaptation, they make a whole thing out of the meet cute. In the book, no, she's too scared.
No.
She's too scared. But she runs away and thinking, what a courtly person. Which made me laugh so much, because if there is one thing you discover about Howl later on, it's that he is not a courtly person.
But you also know that the one thing that will immediately capture his interest is somebody who's not interested in him. And he meets this lovely girl who's just like, bye, and runs.
And then he spends the rest of the book thinking about her, as we later learn. She walked away.
We do need to talk about when do we think Howl actually fell for Sophie, but let's save that and get to the house.
So, can I talk about how she gets into the house? Because this is important. So she is tired, and she looks at the moving castle and thinks, oh, there's a lot of smoke and chimneys there. There must be a fire that I can sit next to. That's all I want at the moment. My fortune, my fate in this moment is a comfortable fire that I can sit down next to and never move. And so she goes chasing this idea of a fire. So she runs up to the moving castle. She yells, stop at it. And it stops. There are literal magical walls and barriers preventing her from getting in. So she pushes and she explores and she yells and she shoves in the back door. And once she gets in, she makes a beeline for a chair and immediately curls up next to the fire. This is the entire romance arc. It is given to you in a series of like 3 pages because the castle is Howl and the heart of the castle is the fire. And so what she does is she basically just pushes her way into his heart and refuses and taking the balance, of thinking about the kind of archetypes that Diana Wynne Jones does. She is a Janet. She's just doing it backwards. She refuses to budge first, and then she falls in love after that. But it's just so funny to me that it's so literal, the idea of this romance where you are moving past this guy's walls and barriers, shoving your way into his heart and refusing to move. And she does not recognize it at the time at all. But because the hearth is the heart of the home, and very literally Calcifer's magic is holding the moving castle together, and all of it depends on Howl's heart. It's all the same thing. And the first thing she does is
she literally goes, my fortune is this.
Yeah, it's so good. And we're told right in the beginning, she can see Calcifer, who is the fire demon, and who is sitting on Howl's heart. This is another moment, actually, of just like me for real, because she has this conversation with Calcifer. We're told that only people who can see and interact with Calcifer, who understand that there is a heart at the center of this castle, are really welcome there. Most people can't and don't. And so she talks the conversation with Calcifer, and Calcifer says, oh, I'm being exploited by this terrible wizard. Won't you help me break my contract? And Sophie's like, and again, this is another point of echo, because Sophie has gotten the idea from talking with her younger sister, Martha. Her younger sister is like, our stepmother is exploiting you. And Sophie's like, wow, maybe she is exploiting me. This is not true. We learned later on that Martha is resentful against her mother, but actually, Fanny and Sophie are just not understanding what each other needs at this moment, and they are, in fact, very fond of each other, much like Howl and Calcifer. But Sophie talks to Calcifer, and Calcifer's like, my wizard is exploiting me, help me break my contract, and Sophie's like, just like me, I know what it's like to be exploited in an employment situation. We should break each other's contract.
We will form a union.
So Calcifer and Sophie make this bargain. Calcifer will try to break the spell that he can see that's on Sophie, and Sophie will try to rescue Calcifer from his contract with Howl. And this also is where we get our big hint that a sufficiently powerful magical being can look at Sophie and be like, wow, you are under a serious curse, instantly. Because the strong magic that the Witch of the Waste has put on her is very, very visible to Calcifer right away.
Yeah, and as a side note, speaking of the way that Calcifer and Sophie mirror each other, this also, Sophie, I think, learns how to fall in love with Howl, how to act towards Howl from Calcifer. there's a bit later on where Sophie says it didn't surprise her to find that Calcifer admired the curse any more than it surprised her when he called Howl a fool. He was always insulting Howl, but she never could work out if Calcifer really hated Howl. Calcifer looked so evil anyway that it was hard to tell. Obviously, Calcifer and Howl love each other very much, and when Sophie calls Howl a fool, it is also a way of saying I love you very much.
They're completely bookended, because the first thing Calcifer says is I'm being exploited, and the very last thing Sophie says to Howl, or one of the last things she says, is and you'll exploit me. Like, she accepts that she is stepping into that role, and she recognizes it for what it is.
Yes.
Yep.
Because by the end of the book, she finally understands each other, and understands herself and Howl and Calcifer. These are all part and parcel of the same thing.
But also, right, the first thing that Sophie figures out is she can bully Calcifer. She can get Calcifer to do what she wants just by steamrolling over him and assuming he's going to do it, and then he does, which astonishes the other inhabitant of the castle, who is Howl's apprentice, Michael, whom we later discover Howl took in as like a sort of sad abandoned orphan, because Howl's not that bad, really, or is he? And Michael's like, oh, we can't cook when Howl's not here, because Calcifer won't let us use the fire, because Calcifer is the fire. And Sophie's like, shut up, I'm having bacon. Calcifer.
Yeah. And
it's funny because...
I was going to say that this is such a romance thing, the idea of, like, knowing one another's vulnerabilities. Like, later in the book, we'll get onto the fact that he shows her whales, but his true weak flank, as they say, is Calcifer. And one of the very first things that Hal notices about Sophie is that she can manipulate Calcifer, who in all of this is the stand-in for his heart. Like, he lets her in, like, he walks into the castle and it's like, somebody is there who is manipulating Calcifer, and he's like, intriguing.
Yeah. So maybe now is the time that we ask the question of, so Sophie settles in, she's like, I'm your new housekeeper, and Hal's like, well, I didn't want a housekeeper and I didn't ask, but fine. I mean, what he does is he says nothing. Sophie spends weeks on Tentar. We actually have quite a tight timeline for this book, because we know it's the story starts on May Day, that's when they first meet, and it ends on Midsummer Day, which is about 2 months. And about the first half of that time, Sophie is waiting and waiting to be kicked out of this castle, and Hal just doesn't kick her out. And she's like, well, I guess if he doesn't kick me out, I'm not
and to me, and this is the soul of it, because again, it's about the castle being Hal, right? So the castle is foreboding on the outside, but it is cozy and welcoming on the inside, but also a great big mess. And Sophie is like, looks around and is like, you know what my job is? My job is to clean up this mess. And Howl...
And also find the bits of girl that are in the house.
But he is cleaning up the mess. And so Howl is shouting all the way, but he never actually stops her. Because, and this is why he doesn't kick her out.
Yes.
Part of him knows he needs her love to save him. He's not building his own Janet, but he is sure as hell going to take advantage of the fact that one has walked in the door. And it's Beauty and the Beast as well. Like, it's that, somebody has to fall in love with me to break this curse. And someone has now presented themselves to do so.
And it is, like, right away from the moment that Sophie walks in and Calcifer says, I can break your curse if you'll break mine. We can't break we can't break our curses on our own. It needs to be done by somebody else. We need help to do it. Coming from Fire and Hemlock, there's a really, really strong running theme in Fire and Hemlock that you cannot be a hero on your own behalf. You have to do it for somebody else, on somebody else's behalf. And that is really literally the way the rules of Ingeru work. You can't tell someone about your curse. You can only sort of kind of ask for help in a roundabout way. You can't say, help, I've been turned into an old woman, please fix me. You need to be able to put yourself in a situation where someone can be a hero for you, or someone can learn about you and can figure you out enough to break that curse. Like, there has to be kind of a deep knowledge there and a willingness to intertwine yourself with somebody else for long enough to learn how to do it.
And I think moving into a house is such a classic way of doing that, because you were talking about Diana Wynne Jones and the Gothic, and obviously the main romance structure that this book is doing is Gothic romance. Like, there is a girl who enters a strange house because it seems like she has no other options, like she's alone in the world, and this is her one option, is to move into this strange house. She has to solve the central mystery of the house, and by doing so, release the capacity for love in the house's wicked master. And this allows everyone to move on from the mistakes of the past and be happy in the future. Like, that is what a Gothic romance is. Like, you look at it and you're
Yeah.
like, well, that's Jane Eyre. Like, that's
Exactly.
Beauty and the Beast. That's what all of them are doing. And it's true. Like, and the Wicked Master cannot break free on his own. And the girl's role is to move in and to solve the house. And by
Yes.
doing so, she
And
gets
again,
saved herself, but it's through the heroism of what she does in the house.
And one of the rules of the Gothic is the person who looks the most evil is always the person who is actually the love interest at the end. And so Sophie walks into the house and thinks, yes, I've been told that he's been chopping up girls and hiding them in his house, and I'm going to solve that problem. And she's very embarrassed.
She's looking for hints, right? She's been told that she needs to break the contract between Howl and Calcifer, but Calcifer, just like Sophie, can't tell her the exact terms of the contract, of the curses, the thing that's binding them. So she's digging up through the whole house looking for hints, and just coincidentally getting to know the house really well and making it all beautiful and bright. And there's a moment when Hal walks in and says, "Does something happen in here? It looks lighter." And Sophie's been whitewashing the whole place.
Yep.
But it's a metaphor for, what she's doing to Hal's. There's a bit of light getting in here.
Yeah,
now.
like Fanny near the end of the book says that, if Hal's not evil anymore, it must be because of Sophie's doing. Like, you must have reformed him. And there's no really easy way to say, no, I just cleaned the house. But again, it's a metaphor. She hasn't actually changed him in any way, but she's forced him to get rid of some of the muck. Like, she's stripped away some of the disguising stuff that was around Howl. And that's her job in the house.
But it's not one-sided either, because the other thing that's happening, and the thing that is happening to Sophie, that has started happening to Sophie as soon as she was turned old, but really happens to Sophie when she starts living in Howl's house and learning how to interact with Howl, how Howl and Casper interact with each other, is Sophie is giving herself permission to be a bit worse.
Yes! Which is great. It's so good. Okay, because Sophie at the start of the book is a miserable and very lonely and very bored teenage girl who is resigned to this just being her life. And she's scared, and it's flattened her down into almost nothing. And there's a moment when she loses her temper, and it's before the curse takes hold, before the Witch of the Waste turns up. She's had a bad day. She snaps at a customer who comes in like, "Why is this hat not magically getting me to run away with aristocracy? I know you sold another one that did do that." And Sophie's like, I am not in the mood to give you my fantasy life today. You look terrible in that hat. But she feels so much joy in being honestly nasty to someone. Like, take off the customer service face. I don't like you, and I don't like this. And it's a real moment of vindication for Sophie, almost. It's one of the moments where you see her unhappiness come to the surface. But also, she's not being a very nice person. That is just a random person who bought a hat. And Sophie gives herself permission, on becoming old, to be her true self. She's like, well, I don't need to be that good older sister, that good daughter who cares about everyone's feelings, that good shop assistant who even cares about the customers' feelings. I don't need to do any of that anymore because I'm 90 and I'm practically dead anyway. I might as well at least be honest, I think is the missing word there. And you get Sophie's true self,
and I think this is
who is just as bad as
a
Hal.
historical romance trope that Diana Wynne Jones is doing. She is doing the I can be my true bold self because I'm in disguise. In romance, this is usually the girl dressed as a boy. And this is something that Fire and Hemlock was doing a bit, because what you're saying is, I have the freedom to step outside social convention and enter into a man's intimate circle because I am no longer a young girl in the social role of a young girl. And I think Diana Wynne Jones is kind of poking fun at it a bit here, because instead of it being like, oh no, you can't be alone with him because he'll compromise your virtue, it's, oh, well, he won't want to eat my soul because I'm 90. But at the same time, it's giving her that exact
but it's
freedom
also about
of, it doesn't matter that he's a handsome young man. And if I was my real self, I would feel very shy and, oh, he's a handsome young man. I'm like, well, it doesn't really matter because I'm 90. And so she just charges ahead being herself.
I'm immune to handsome young men, she says, even while talking to Howl Suits about how elder women and aunts and grandmothers are not immune to Howl Suits.
Oh gosh. By the way, I should note here that I did go through reflections just before we started recording, so we do have Diana Wynne Jones's face cast for Howl. she did make a note. If you want to know what Howl's Moving Castle, Howell Jenkins looks like, Google 1980s Andre Agassi. You want specifically the photos with the blonde mullet and the short shorts.
So beautiful.
Yes.
So wonderful.
They're perfect. They're
He is
perfect.
beautiful.
But that's the other thing about how. So the first thing that unlocks me and Sophie is being 90 and being like, well, everyone expects old women to be nosy and mean, so I'm just living up to my disguise. I'm in disguise and I'm doing what one would do. But then the other thing that unlocks it, and I think, Freya, you're more expert than me, but I think this is also a historical romance trope, which is when the male lead has the reputation of being a bit bad, a bit wicked. This gives the heroine permission to be mean to him in specific, because she's like, well, you're a bad person, and therefore I can be rude to you, and it's not a bad thing to do.
Right. But because Howl's Moving Castle is also a power fantasy, right?
Yes.
And Sophie's power fantasy specifically is imagine not giving a shit. Imagine that. And this is why I think she goes straight to the evil wizard's castle the minute she's under a curse. She's like, I'm free. I don't have to care about anyone's feelings anymore. Where do you go when you're not caring about anyone's feelings? You go to Evil Wizard Castle. That's what you do there.
Yeah, but it is built on the structure of a different romance trope, which is the wallflower and the rake. Even though both of them are not actually that thing at the heart, both of them start like, the grey mouse, the self-effacing, that I am literally an inanimate object. Like, she is being a wolf. Like, wallflower is like everything painted on the surface of Sophie at the beginning. And Howl has this reputation for being, and he is incredibly fickle and flirty. And the fantasy of the wallflower and the rake is, oh, he's so fickle and flirty, but nobody actually touches his heart because he pretends not to have one. But I, the servant girl / shy wallflower, will be the one who will touch and win his heart. Quite literally in this case. Romance fantasy that this is built on. And part of it is that if you are so socially removed from the noble rake, that you can be the person who speaks back to him and the person who tells him to his face what kind of person he is, because, of course there won't be any consequences. And then, of course, he loves you for how outspoken you are and elevates you socially. That's the whole, first it's the Cinderella thing, but it's also the wallflower and the rake.
Right. And this literally happens. I think you are so right that Jane Eyre is in the DNA of this book, because this literally happens to one of the hats in the first chapter. She makes a hat for Jane Fairfax, who is a plain wallflower who's a bit weird, who's what everyone's like, oh, that weird Jane Fairfax. And gives her a hat that says someone in a high position will see your nobility and fall in love with you. And then that happens.
Yeah, I think Sophie on one level knows the romance tropes. She just doesn't, and she does not recognize the ones that she's walking into, even though they are, baked into the fabric of the story that she's in.
Well, she knows them and she loves them as well. Like, she's making all these very romantic hats which are giving people these romance futures because she is enchanting them without realizing it. There's one she looks at and goes, you will have to marry money. And we don't get the punchline of that till the end of the book, where we do find that the eventual owner of that hat did indeed marry money. But I think Sophie, from the very beginning, wants love so much, and yet will not acknowledge that she is walking into a romance.
She also doesn't acknowledge how, we see even in the first two chapters, something I think is really interesting with her sisters. So there's the relationship that Sophie has with her sisters. She is selfless, but she takes care of them. She soothes their tantrums. She parents them in a real sense, even though they do have a competent stepmother as well, is so baked into her personality. And she, we see the first thing that we hear her sisters say is, Letty says, why should Martha have the best of it because she was born the youngest? I shall marry a prince. And Martha says, I will end up disgustingly rich without having to marry anybody. And by the second chapter, we already learned that they have grown up. Their ideas of themselves and what they want have reversed. So one of the early punchlines of the book is Letty goes off to learn about magic, and Martha goes off to learn about magic. Letty goes off to the bakery. Sophie goes to visit Letty and realizes that Letty is actually Martha because they've swapped. Martha wants to go to the bakery because she wants to marry so young and have 10 children. And Letty wants to go learn magic and have an exciting future without having to marry anybody, which is the exact opposite of what we're told that they wanted when they were children. But they've grown and they've changed and they've become different people who can decide their own futures. And Sophie has not hit that point. Sophie is still stuck in this vision of herself as the eternal caretaker to two younger sisters with their paths written out for them that she had when she was growing up. And it takes the inciting incident of something completely out of pocket happening to her for her to start re-envisioning what a future for herself could look like and what her ideas for what kind of future she wants for herself.
But I think you're right in that the actual inciting incident is that like brain stoppage moment where she realizes that Martha and Letty have changed their fate from what they should be based on this story. Like everything for Sophie, I think mentally changes then. And everything that happens with the Witch at the Waste and seizing the excuse to go off and take her fortune would not have happened if it weren't for what she already knows that her sisters have done.
Right. Because then what we learn about the Witch of the Waste's curse is that, you know, the curse is bad. It turns Sophie old. It's shocking. But everyone, by the end of the book, everyone's had a go at taking the curse off Sophie, and it just won't go. Because Sophie's like, yes, my curse that gives me freedom to go be a servant girl in Howl's house.
So much. She is having a great time. Part of what is fun about reading Howl's Moving Castle is the minute you get Sophie into the castle, she starts having a great time. She loves doing this. It's not just, she doesn't love cleaning, she loves making everybody miserable with the cleaning.
Yes.
She loves going through Howl's bathroom and checking all his mysterious tubes of magical potions, being like, for decay, hair, eyes, are these bits of girl? Drying power! Drying power. Do I want the drying power? It's probably drying powder.
Yeah, I know that for decay is just that he went home to Wales and saw like some late night TV ad for like L'Oreal rejuvenation and was like, I will buy 5 tubes.
I thought it was probably toothpaste. But the thing is, okay, so Howl is a dandy, right? And so much of what's great about Howl is he looks great. His hair is fantastic. He dyes it different colours depending on his mood. He has these wonderful outfits that he wears, which is the first thing Sophie noticed about him when they had the meet cute before she even knew who he was. And the thing we do know about Sophie, actually, is she is a genius with outfits. She loves a hat. She loves a look. She looks at Howl and she is like, this fashion plate of a man is looking great. And now I will reorganize his bathroom.
Yes.
Which leads us to the slime incident.
Oh my god, the slime incident, which is another perfect indicator of I hit the slime incident on my read. What happens is Sophie's been messing around in his bathroom, and she's moved one of his hair things around, and he expects to get one sort of hair, and instead it turns his hair very, very, very faintly pink. And he has a tremendous tantrum about it. This is the worst thing that's ever happened to him. He falls over in front of the fireplace. He produces massive quantities of green slime. And Sophie's sitting there thinking, ah yes, tantrums, I know about these. My younger sisters had them all the time. They're a childish thing for children.
Which, by the way, we need to talk about the mummy issues of the book.
Yeah. Sophie's sitting there thinking this is a childish thing for children and I know how to take care of it. I will treat him as I treat my younger sisters. 12 chapters later, Sophie will have a massive tantrum where she produces a form of slime and goes out and starts killing everything in sight. But what Sophie, the important thing about a tantrum is that it is seldom about the thing it appears to be about, which is another way in which Sophie is so insightful about other people and again cannot recognize when they are mirroring herself. It is everything that Sophie is doing throughout the book is not about the thing that it appears to be about.
Let's talk about the mummy issues because they're very funny.
Yes.
So we get to the green slime incident, right? And Sophie, I think, mothers Howl a bit in that she's dealing with the tantrum. And be like, this is very silly of you, you're being really childish. She packs him into the shower and turns the shower on to get the slime off. She cleans up, she gets him dressed, she puts him down in front of the fire, she gives him a mug of hot milk. So tell me what's really bothering you. I will say, I think this is probably about the time Howl falls for Sophie. This is my feeling. But anyway,
Oh.
I don't know if I think we all disagree about the exact moment. Anyway, back half of the book. At this point, Sophie is a fixture in Howl's moving castle. He's not kicking her out. It seems like he's not going to, because he's had a brilliant idea. While this has been going on, the Witch of the Waste has been threatening the kingdom, and various important people, the wizard Suleiman, the prince Justin, they've disappeared. And Howl is desperately trying not to be sent to find them. Or this is what he tells Sophie anyway. I'm trying not to do this thing, and you're going to help me. You're going to pretend to be my dear old mother and go and visit the king and tell him what a bad and useless person I am, so that he will then not require me to do anything brave or complicated or difficult. And Sophie goes, you want me to what?
But he buys her a really nice outfit about it.
He does. He spends all the money the king has already given him on buying her the best possible outfit.
For being an old lady.
And at no point is Sophie like, I'm 90 and you're 27. How am I your old mother? Nobody questions this at any point.
Nobody questions this.
I'm not sure there's a single character who's actually fooled by Sophie's Howl's mother impersonation. I think everyone knows, because I think the whole thing is set up by Howl because he loves it when Sophie causes chaos. It's extremely funny and delightful for him, for Sophie to cause chaos. And one of my favourite moments in the book is Sophie getting swept off through the palace to see the king, and Howl realises at the last moment he's not going to get to watch.
Yes.
He set all this up so he could watch Sophie and the king have this insane conversation, and now he's not going to be there.
It's about being a bitch who loves drama, and it's like it's a mirror. If we want to stick on the Jane Eyre thing, it's that thing where Mr. Rochester dresses up as a fortune teller and is like, I will get her to talk about her true feelings about me, and I'll get to listen. And he's doing that. He's like, I will make her talk about me to an audience. This is going to be so good.
Yes. And then he doesn't get to be there. And it's true that the minute that she's standing in front, so her task is to blacken Howl's name to the king. And this is, I think, one of our first indicators of Sophie's true feelings about Howl, because she's standing there in front of the king and her mind goes blank and she's like, oh my god, I can't think of a single bad thing about Howl.
But then the king starts helping her and starts telling her bad things about Howl. She says, yes, I agree, and you know what? Furthermore, because you know what Sophie loves to do? She loves to talk about Howl.
Oh, she does. Hang on, I'm going to read out what Sophie says about Howl. Her mind was such a blank that for a second it actually seemed to her that Howl had no faults at all. How stupid. Well, he's fickle, careless, selfish, and hysterical, she said. Half the time I think he doesn't care what happens to anyone as long as he's all right. But then I find out how awfully kind he's been to someone. Then I think he's kind just when it suits him. Only then I find out he undercharges poor people. I don't know, Your Majesty, he's a mess. And the king says, my impression was that Howl is an unprincipled, slippery rogue with a glib tongue and a clever mind. Would you agree? How well you put it, Sophie said heartily, but you left out how vain he is. She looked suspiciously at the king across the yards of carpet. He seemed so surprisingly ready to help her blacken Howl's name.
The king does not think Sophie is Howl's mother. I'm really sure of that. I mean, in fact, also, I do think Howl is getting a kick out of going around town introducing Sophie as Mrs. Pendragon.
Yeah.
And and the important thing about this scene is that it happens directly after an emotional turn, a romantic turning point, which is she learns his true name.
Yes.
This is directly after when he's like, I may as well drag you to Wales or you will just stick your nose in and come by yourself. But it is a huge step because you know that no other girl he's ever flirted with has seen where he really comes from, met his family, and learned his true name. And he's like, hey, this is Sophie. She appears to be old.
I just thought you might want to meet her.
What are you doing?
Although speaking of the old mother thing, though, there is kind of this fun constant reversal because he does bundle, like, I noticed this when he's like, well, I want to bring Sophie to Wales, and I guess I'd better bring Michael too, because it's not fair to Michael if Sophie gets to go and Michael doesn't. There is this sort of like weird head of household thing with Hal, where he's like, these are my two wards, Sophie and Michael, and I have to treat them the same, or it's not fair. But then also Sophie, like it is, and again, this is something that flips over from Fire and Hemlock. This constant power dynamic reversal of who is responsible for whom. Like Hal's like, well, I'm responsible for Sophie. She lives in my house. She's one of my retainers. But then Sophie is my mother. She's responsible for me. She has to clean up after my slime and make sure that my feelings are not hurt.
But I mean that
and it's constantly flipping back.
And that scene does something very different. Does something for Sophie and does something very different for the reader. Because obviously for Sophie, it's the equivalent of that scene in a historical romance where you shift from using someone's title to using their name. Like you have been allowed an intimacy that nobody else has thus far been allowed. For the reader, it's where you realize that Sophie has just undergone a very brief and confusing reverse portal fantasy.
I love it
And then you realize where Howl comes from, and you're like, oh, he's a nerd. Oh my god.
You need to So the great delight of Howl's Moving Castle, the book, as opposed to the film adaptation, is that you read the book and you're like, he's Welsh. He's a Welsh PhD student who discovered how to magically transport himself to another world where he is an evil wizard, and he is doing this all the time because it gets him out of finishing his PhD.
Yeah, and then you go home and his sister's like, you spend all this time at university, you don't get a proper job, you bring shame on our household. He's like, fuck.
And then he goes to the rugby reunion dinner and comes back singing filthy rugby songs. And you're like, oh, this man, I've met him many times.
And this is actually my theory for when Hal becomes romantically interested in Sophie, but like starts to fall properly in love with Sophie. Because the other thing about this reversal is Hal seems very, what a courtly person, very important in Ingery. He's, everyone's afraid of him. The king is asking him, is trying to bring him on board. He does, everyone is respectful of his powerful magic. And he goes home and he's nothing. He's the layabout that his family is kind of embarrassed by. His nephew is kind of embarrassed by. Everyone's like, oh God, it's Howl. And at the end, when they're about to leave, he's sort of trapped on the staircase with Megan his older sister lecturing him, like, you wasted all this money, all these sacrifices that other people made, you've got nothing to show for it, what have you done with your life? And Sophie steps up in order to get them out of the house, defends him, and is like, Howl, we must be going, the servants are selling the gold plate in your absence. He's such an important man, which is
so weird for Megan.
But that is also a classic romance novel beat, right? It's the like, someone is being humiliated. Someone sort of, this is Emma, which I think, speaking of Jane Fairfax, is also in the DNA of this book. The moment in Emma when Mr. Knightley saves Harriet from standing alone at the dance. And Harriet's like, well, obviously that's when I fell in love with him, because I was being embarrassed and he rescued me from social embarrassment. And I think that Sophie rescuing Hal from social embarrassment is the moment that he falls in love with her. We don't get it.
Freya, give us your take then.
Oh, my take is more controversial. My take
is
it was love at first sight.
Oh.
And the reason that is because, okay, so when the witch comes into the shop the first time, she says all this very confusing stuff that we do not get an explanation for until nearly the end of the book. And one of the things she does is, as soon as she casts the spell on Sophie, she says, let that teach you to meddle with things that belong to me. And if you don't know the rather confusing and a bit weird thing that she thinks that Sophie is Letty, you think, okay, like, she came in talking about jealousy and, like, nobody sets herself up in opposition to the Witch of the Waste. And if Sophie is a Janet, it's because the witch accidentally made her one. She walks in and it's like, you've been messing with this Howl person who belongs to me. How dare you? And walks out again. Sophie's like, well, didn't really understand that. But words are so important. Like, I think in this moment, and we know that they have met once already. And, you can make an argument that Hal recognizes in Sophie in that moment somebody important, or somebody who is going to be important. And even though it's more of a story logic than an internal logic, I think when the witch walks in, the witch also has this moment of recognition of this is the person who is going to try and take Howl from me, or who is going to be the person who breaks the spell. Even though she's a very bad Laurel, there is still a Tamlin going on here. She is still attempting badly to collect young men. And, there's more of like a toxic ex, jilted, my ex-girlfriend went crazy kind of narrative going here, which is not wonderful. But at the same time, she is trying to get at Howl, and Sophie is going to be the one to rescue him and get him out of the brothers for good.
Yeah,
and it just really struck me, that first scene, because that note about like, oh, Letty was in Percival's memories, and I thought you were Letty, and walks in. It's a bit convoluted. And the whole point of it is to create a situation where the witch walks in and is like, you are setting yourself up as competition, and I won't have it. And it's true, because Sophie is setting herself up as a powerful witch, and she's about to take Howl, and all of it unravels from there. And I think the witch speaks it into being in that scene.
I love that.
Which is Sophie's spell gift as well. I think the witch is pretty clearly an incarnation of the Diana Wynne Jones evil older woman. In fact, she is she's ancient. She is actually the age Sophie appears to be. But she's keeping herself young and beautiful through her magic. But she is also the power that steals Sophie's youth from her. I think we've got, for once, we don't have the mother figure being a monster. Fanny is not a monster. And in fact, Fanny and Sophie have a very touching reunion near the end of the book, which always gets to me. I'm always like, oh, because all that sort of monstrous older woman has been projected onto the witch, who is the real person who's taken Sophie's everything away from her.
But to talk about there's the other Diana Wynne Jones thing going on here, where the villain of the book is also an echo of the protagonist of the book, is someone that they could both. But I think this is true. Another thing that links Howl and Sophie as reflections of each other is that they are both, in slightly different ways, reflections of the Witch of the Waste. So the witch is, she, as you say, she sails in at the beginning and is like, you're setting up as competition to me. You are the most powerful other witch in this story, to Sophie, and I'm going to make you old like me while I look young like you. But the thing that we eventually learn about both the witch and Howl is that both of them gained part of their powers by rescuing a falling star and giving their heart away to a falling star a long time ago. And various people throughout the book eventually, mostly it's Mrs. Pentstemon, who's Howl's old teacher, who says the witch got the way she is over 100 years as a long-term result of this curse, and Howl is going that same way. So the witch is also quite literally who Howl will become if the curse is not broken, if he continues to have his heart sort of outsourced to Calcifer and loses part of his humanity that way. And we see, there's this very explicit theme with the witch where every time Sophie sees her, she looks different. She looks, she's got a different hair color and a different outfit and a whole different vibe. And this is what Howl is doing, is he constantly redyes his hair and changes his effect. I think the 3 hair colors that Howl goes through, which are dark and kind of gingery, fairish, pinkish, and white, are the same hair colors that we see on the witch when Sophie meets the witch time and time again. They both are kind of constantly trying to transform themselves in order to find a person they can be that's comfortable. And similarly, the thing that Howl is doing with his, we eventually learn that Howl is going around making women fall in love with him until, when they fall in love with him, he suddenly loses all interest.
Because he can't love because he hasn't got his heart.
Because he can't love because he hasn't got his heart. We eventually learned that what the witch is doing is she is trying to build herself the perfect man, Rocky Horror style, by taking bits and pieces from all these other interesting men in the story, and to construct herself the perfect consort with which to rule the kingdom. And I think the implication there is a mirror to Howl's I'm constantly trying to find the right woman, a woman true and fair, and I can't do it because I've lost my heart. I can't attach myself to a single person. And the witch also can't attach herself to a single person. She's got to make a composite person out of missing parts in a really, real sort of literalization of Howl looking all over the place to try and find just the right one. I think there's a really strong echo there of sort of the underlying story logic of what's going on with Howl. Should we talk about the curse while we're at it?
Let's talk about the curse. The curse is, Diana, you just can't help yourself. So this is written as a children's book, sold as a children's book, entirely organised around a John Donne poem, just to keep you amused. And the poem is Donne's song which is a poem about the difficulty, the impossibility of finding a woman who will be true. And it's the curse that the witch has laid on Howl. But it is also John Donne's song, a beautiful poem from, 17th century England?
Yes.
Go and catch a falling star, get with child a mandrake root, tell me where all past years are, or who cleft the devil's foot. Teach me to hear mermaids singing, or to keep off envy's stinging, and find what wind serves to advance an honest mind. And that is the poem that Sophie comes across, and she finds this very confusing piece of paper with strange markings on it. And this is before we know about Wales. At this point, as far as we know, this is just a secondary world fantasy. So, like, mysterious piece of paper with mysterious poem written on it. And at the end of the poem is written, decide what this is all about. Write a second verse yourself.
Sophie doesn't even find it. Michael has
Michael.
it. Michael is
trying
like, this is
so
my
hard.
spell homework. I don't know how to do my spell homework. Can you help me with my homework?
Right, so Sophie tries to help Michael with this spell homework. They have to do the spell somehow. They even try to catch a falling star. And there's this very moving sequence where they almost catch it and it throws itself into the puddles of the marshes to die, and they feel so sorry for it. And of course, the falling star is a fire demon like Calcifer, because Calcifer is the falling star that Howl caught. So eventually they give up on the spell and like, this is too difficult. Show it to Howl, and Howl very clearly looks at this is a photocopy of someone's English homework. This is homework, but it's not spell homework. And that is when they have to go to Wales to find the actual spell, which has been swapped somehow with this photocopied piece of homework.
But it's not an accident. And
But we are told the second verse.
Sophie is poking around Howl's self. Like,
Yes.
she is the one who opens the door with the black knob downwards and is like, weird, some nothingness, and then closes it again. But that's how the spell and the curse creep through. It is actually Sophie's fault because she has been opening, quite literally and figuratively, all the doors she can and poking her nose into every aspect of Howl she possibly could.
Because Sophie and the witch both really, by the end of the book, really know Howl. And one of the things Howl says about this curse is it lays him bare. It literally describes him word for word, the things he's done, the things he knows. And that is something Sophie and the witch have in common, that they want to lay him bare. But anyway, they go off to Wales. They have to go on a little mini quest to find the English teacher who set this homework. And they find her, and Sophie is like, I hate her.
I wonder why
She
I
is
hate her.
so beautiful, and Howl is instantly interested in her, and I hate this bitch. For no reason. No reason.
No reason at all. No. Miss Angorian and her beautiful throbbing voice.
I've got to say, some of the ways that Sophie talks about Miss Angorian specifically, I'm like, okay, part of your power fantasy with Howl is that you really like the idea of going around the countryside seducing beautiful women. You're into this.
Yes.
You enjoy judging him for it, but like as an abstract concept, Sophie perhaps would also like to be going around the countryside seducing beautiful women. So they find the English teacher, and Howl starts flirting with her instantly, and we do discover later that flirting is actually one of Howl's ways of getting information out of people. I think Howl clocks that Miss Angorian is what she is immediately.
Yep.
I don't know if you guys agree.
No, I agree.
I think I agree as well. Yeah.
I think Howl clocks almost everything immediately. I think Howl knows Sophie's under a curse from the first time they have an actual conversation. He just lies a lot. He's a lying liar who lies.
Yeah, I know. Also,
but while he
doesn't use his magic much, but he could. Like, so much of the entire book is Sophie just thinking, having these little moments of being like, actually, he probably could just clean his entire house or clean up his slime or fix his outfits himself.
Or turn his hair back to like a magic hair dye sequence.
Decides not to. So, like, clearly...
Because it's more fun to have a big tantrum and then be coddled and comforted about it afterwards.
And for him, at this point, it's much more fun to make Sophie believe that he is in love with this random English teacher because he enjoys jealous Sophie than it is, to actually be able to tell the truth.
I just think a lot of problems would have been avoided if he had told Sophie what we eventually know is that this English teacher, Miss Angorian, is the fire demon, the witch's fire demon, the other one. So 100-year-old demon living on the power of a human heart that it's taken. And it's clear that so this is an eventual fate of Calcifer. This is a totally amoral, powerful being that has sort of consumed the life of the person it's attached to.
Right, because what happens at the end when Sophie eventually goes to confront the witch, confronting the witch is not that challenging. Defeating her is easy. It's defeating, because all of her she's so old, all of her power is in the fire demon. You know, the fire demon has sort of taken on the person, you know, the power of the witch and become the real enemy, because she's looking out for another heart now that her heart is the person that she was attached to is gone. But in the meantime, what she says is, oh, I was engaged to Ben Sullivan, who disappeared from here a long time ago, which I'm sure, my theory is that she does this because she knows about Howl, that Howl is only interested in uninterested women. So she has to set herself up with a backstory about how she's unavailable because she's attached to this other man, who we eventually learn is, in fact, we haven't even mentioned the name Wizard.
We have mentioned him, yeah. He's one of the men whom the witch has kidnapped to make her sort of Frankenstein man. And she's discarded the parts that she didn't use into various bits and pieces, including a skull and a scarecrow, whom we have met before.
But the other interesting thing about Ben Sullivan is that he got there first. He was the first one to come to Ingary, and you just know that this eats away at Hal's soul. That he managed to find his way to Ingary and set himself up as a wizard, and there was another random Welsh dude who got there before him.
And it's worse because Ben Sullivan had a guitar, and Howl, who goes everywhere with this guitar, which is he's purchased and picked up somewhere, can't actually play it, and he's like, it's my great sorrow, I'm an unmusical Welshman.
So 2 things about the guitar. One, this is a small minor note, but you know that Howl cannot play the guitar because he doesn't have a case for the guitar. He's just picking it up and carrying it around the countryside bare naked. Every time he goes out courting, he brings the guitar, and I'm like, you are going to ruin the guitar. But second, one of the first things we learn about when he got the skull and the guitar is Michael is complaining because Michael is also in this sort of semi-parentified role towards Howl. He's like, he's so irresponsible with money. I have to try and take the money and hide it because otherwise he'll spend it on useless things. Like, we were starving and he went out and bought this skull and this guitar because he said they looked good. But what we learn at the end is that the skull and the guitar both belonged to Wizard Sullivan, whom Howl is looking for while telling himself that he's not looking for them. So I think it's quite clear to me that Howl went out, saw these, this Welsh guitar and this skull that vibed, and was like, oh god, this is part of my magic puzzle to find these missing people. I've got to get them and bring them home. I need a skull and a guitar for decorative purposes. And spent the last of his money on them.
He just on himself, it's all about the aesthetic. Yes. And that's it.
Yes, exactly. And then eventually they find, so the other thing that the bits of Wizard Sullivan and Prince Justin, who is the king's brother who went off to look for Wizard Sullivan because they were in a relationship of some sort, their leftover bits also got turned into a composite person, another leftover Frankenhuman who is sometimes a dog, who also just wanders his way into the castle. He does just wander his way into the castle. He's there for a reason. He's there to look after Sophie. But because he's only a dog, he's a dog most of the time, Sophie doesn't clock what he's really there for quite a while. She's like, well, I have a cursed dog now. As soon as he turns back into a proper person, he's like, my guitar, and starts playing it. What's actually going on with the dogman, of course. Oh, sorry, Freya, you were going to say something.
No, keep going. Finish the explanation.
That he was hanging around Letty, whom Howl is attempting to court. So there's this whole very funny bit in the middle where Sophie is like, well, I wish that Howl is going off to court my sister Letty, and she's going to get her heart broken unless he falls in love with her properly. So go fall in love with Letty. Be really in love with Letty. Which is, of course, again, Sophie projecting the thing that she really wants for herself onto her sister. Meanwhile,
there's also the really funny bit where she's like, Oh, I mean, Hal's so interesting once you get to know him. He's so complicated. Like, I could see a strong-minded woman like my hot sister being really into that. She could get hurt. I'm really worried about my hot sister, not about me, because that's not me. It's nothing to do with me.
Nothing to do with
But
me. I'm 90.
Letty's in such danger from this sexy wizard. Letty has never, for a single instant, been interested in Howl.
No, what Letty likes is this dog man who's hanging around being like, oh, I'm so cursed and sad.
Letty's entire arc in this is so funny because you think, oh yeah, she does seem like somebody who's really strong-minded. She knows what she wants. She's got everything sorted out, and then she does seem weirdly attracted to this man who she just treats like a dog.
Yes.
And the way that Sophie describes their interactions is so funny.
Yes.
And like, she actually describes Letty hanging on his arm in an owner-like way, and she couldn't quite approve. And then patting him like he's an actual dog. And then at the end of the book, poor Letty gets her nice tame dog man taken away and replaced with an older mentor figure, because Diana's clearly like, this is what you actually need if you're a strong-minded young woman.
An older mentor figure and a prince she doesn't actually like, whom she was so annoyed by.
The possibility of marrying a prince for Letty is there, and she's like, oh no. Oh, that one. Okay.
But anyway, so Letty has this dog man. We eventually learn. So Sophie sees a scene of Howl and Letty courting, which we eventually learn is both of them attempting to use each other to find out information about Sophie.
It's funny because Sophie sees herself as a background character and scenery. No, everybody in the world is obsessed with what is Sophie doing and why.
Right? No one understands why she's doing what she's doing. So Letty, who is worried about Sophie, sends the dog man to go watch over Sophie, and from then on, the dog man's main role in the book is any time that it seems like Howl and Sophie are going to have like a heart-bearing moment where they get closer, the dog comes in and is like, nope. Won't be doing that.
What the dog man does mostly is try to bite Howl, because he has been sent to protect Sophie from her own terrible taste in men.
Mostly he just like herds her out of the room. Like there's a scene when Howl gets a terrible cold 2/3 of the way through this book, and he's lying and pining in bed, and he's trying to summon Michael and Sophie up to entertain him. He wants them to like run and fetch and carry him things, which again, he could snap his fingers and summon a box of tissues, and later he does. But he's like, Michael, you must bring me tissues. Sophie, you must bring me hot soup. And Sophie runs upstairs and brings him the hot soup, and they have what seems like a tender heart-to-heart where Howl is actually laying bare some of his feelings, and the dog comes in like, nope. Absolutely not.
But it's too late at this point. Sophie has already fallen for him.
So here's the corollary part of the question earlier. When do you think Sophie falls for Howl?
Now, I think that is love at first sight. I think that meet cute in the marketplace, which is like, oh goodness, the most handsome man here is paying attention to me. What a courtly person. I think she gets that, and then when she meets Wizard Howl and realizes they're the same person, she's like, oh, I think that's it for her.
Yeah,
and he was an evil wizard.
The first she thought she has is, he can never know that I was that like scared little girl that he met. Like her first thought is like, immediately lie, protect my self-image. He can't think badly of me. And she thinks that immediately, and everything from then onwards is a self-defense.
I think you guys are right. I'm 100% in agreement. She is gone from the very first chapter of the book. She's gone.
But I do think that the point where Howl goes from like, I'm interested in this weird puzzle to, oh, I'm in love with Sophie, is actually being mothered after the green slime tantrum. I think he really enjoys that, and then he keeps trying to set up more situations where Sophie will do that. And like, I've got an awful cold! He starts faking his sneezes for fake sympathy. He loves the sympathy.
Yes, he loves sympathy. He loves to be complimented.
Well, on a slightly like more romantic level, it's also about the moment of falling in love is when somebody sees you for who you truly are. And so for Sophie, it is at love at first sight because one of these beautiful young men picks her out of this beautiful, wonderful Mayday crowd and is like, I'm going to treat you like an individual. I'm interested in you. You are not just background scenery. and she can't cope with it at the time. But that's what's happening. It's someone who is seeing her and being like, you are worth paying attention to. You are interesting in and of yourself. And for Hal, I think it's the moment when she realizes that the tantrum is about something else. And finally, he has somebody who is prepared to see through all of the stuff that he is very deliberately putting on the surface.
Then, because what he then does is she says, okay, what's this tantrum really about? Is it this girl who's not interested in you? And he goes, yeah, it's so difficult. It's so hard to be me. I think about her all the time. Lovely, lovely Letty Hatter. And like, I think he's lying. I think he did that for the reaction. I don't think Letty is the sister he's thinking about all the time at this point, because at this point he's already using Letty to get out information about Sophie.
But to go back to the house thing for a second, Freya, I think after the blackening of the name to the king and after Wales, when the romance is really, really kind of kindling along in the background, this is the point that I think Howl does what he thinks is perhaps the most romantic thing in the book, which is they've got to... So Sophie's been in his house. She's been learning him inside out, upside down, all through the book. He's decided, the witch is after him. The curse is pursuing him. Oh, we never actually... We got to Miss Angorian. We never actually finished. I don't think we said explicitly. So the John Donne poem is the curse that the witch laid on him by way of Miss Angorian. And it's pursuing him, and he knows that he's got to move and go on the run so that the witch doesn't get him immediately. He's like, all right, well, where are we going to move the houses of the castle to? I know. There's this hat shop that's just sitting abandoned in Market Chipping. Why don't we go there for no reason and start selling hats?
And Sophie's like, not hats. Right. But actually, Hal is, I think, trying to do a big romantic gesture. This is very, difficult to move where the castle is. It's actually life-threatening for both Howl and Calcifer because it involves physically moving this hearth. And he's like, I will move it into your home. And Sophie's just... She left for a reason. She didn't like it there. But Howl also asks her, so the castle has multiple doors, right? Or one door that opens to multiple places. One of them is Wales, another is going to be the hat shop. And then Howl goes to Sophie and very casually and offhand says, well, where would you like to live? And she goes, oh, a nice house with lots of flowers. So he finds the nicest house he can and a huge array of flowers.
He doesn't just find the flowers, he goes out and grows
there's multiple things about him going out and growing the flowers. So, for one thing, talking about people being their environment, the flowers are there on the edge of the waste because both Howl and Wizard Sullivan were like, how do we fix the Witch of the Waste? Well, her environment is terrible, but if we put a lot of flowers there, then perhaps she'll be nicer, like the flowers. So that's why the flowers are there. They're there to make the Witch of the Waste bloom. And what actually happens instead is they make Sophie bloom. But the other thing is that... Oh, go for it.
You're right in that it's this attempt at a romantic gesture because she says, I would like a big house with lots of flowers. And he makes this enormous show. And it is the scene where the beast shows Belle the library, except he's like, I'm going to show her the flowers. And he opens the door and there's mist and there's beautiful flowers. And Sophie's entire inner monologue is, I can't look impressed. I've spent way too long being unimpressed with this man. I can't change now. And Hal is clearly devastated. He's like, but my moment. But I did this for you. She's like,
It's so funny. But the reason that she says flowers, which, to go back a second to Sophie as reflection of the other people in this book and to Wales. So the reason she says flowers is because she's thinking of Mrs. Fairfax, who is the other older witch figure in the book. She's Letty's tutor, and she lives in a nice house with lots of flowers. And when Sophie is like, where would I like to live? What's the future I see for myself? She thinks about Mrs. Fairfax and a nice house with lots of flowers and kind of a successful witch, which I think is really telling. Someone who has this happy life, but also has this magic and enchantment and is able to be really domestic and also really powerful. Which is kind of the source of Sophie's power. And I think, Freya, you said something really, really thoughtful when we were talking about this book in advance, which is that as much as everything in the book is a reflection of Sophie, Sophie sees herself in all the older women in the book. She sees herself in the witch. She sees herself in Mrs. Fairfax. She also sees herself in Megan, who is Howl's mean older sister, because Sophie is an older sister. And, when she's arguing with Howl, she's like, sometimes I know how Megan got the way she is. But I do think Megan is also... a sort of dark reflection of who Sophie might have been had she stayed along her path. Because what we know about Megan is that she kind of obliquely refers to sacrifices that other people made so Howl could have the education that he got, which implies very strongly to me that Megan perhaps wanted to go to university and didn't get to. And her house has Rivendell on the door, like as a Lord of the Rings reference. Megan has an inner life of fantasy and perhaps had dreams at one point and said, no, my younger brother has to go to school. I shall stay here and live an ordinary life so that he can achieve something great, which he doesn't do. And that is exactly what Sophie is doing at the beginning of the book. It's my younger sisters need to have a big adventure. And that's...
You're right. You're
Yeah,
absolutely right. And then Megan is, I mean, she's a very real character. She's really nasty. She's really bitter. She's got this life with like a not very interested in her teenage son and a daughter who adores Uncle Howl and is not very like impressed by her mother. Megan's lost her future, if you like. She's not happy in who she is. She envies Howl desperately, and there isn't really a way to fix that.
And you don't really know anything at all about their parents, but what you do know is that Howl responds really well to Sophie using these mothering tactics that she's thinking of as oldest sibling tactics. And we know how Diana Wynne Jones feels about parentified oldest siblings. And there's that very clear parallel of him saying, you remind me of Megan. And her being like, yeah, I know where Megan gets the way she is. And he says something at one point which I think gets to one of the really important shared themes between this book and Fire and Hemlock. And he says, Megan's full of envy because she's respectable and I'm not. And that is also one of the really important things. So this comes back to the message of this book, which is very similar to the central message of Fire and Hemlock, is the way to get you what you want and be happy is to conquer social awkwardness and shame and to not care what people think of you. And Polly fights it the whole book. Sophie discovers a shortcut, which is
P90.
And Howl has already managed it. Like he has people calling him a coward, and he calls it and wicked and a slitherer and a disappointment. And he clearly doesn't care what people think about him, while seeming like he kind of does because he's very vain. And one of the things that makes Sophie fall for Howl in the midst of being very exasperated and disapproving of him is how he doesn't care about how people think of him and how freeing that clearly is. Because it's not really very fairy tale heroic to be like, oh, I need the king to think I'm flighty and pathetic. Go and tell him that for me. But in another way it is, because the opposite of the true heroism is shame. And so Sophie is seeing this reflection in Howl of that is her deep, deep envy of not caring what people think and not caring what the story that you're meant to be fitting into is. And it just goes to war against her responsible eldest sibling programming. And it's an envy because she's trying to be respectable and Howl is deeply unrespectable. And it's, do I want it or do I want to be it?
Everything with Howl is, do I want it or do I want to be it? And the answer is yes, it's both.
Yeah. But then the final older woman who Sophie says, oh, I'm like you, is her stepmother, Fanny, who at the start of the book there, when Sophie meets her sister Martha and Martha says, Fanny is exploiting you, Sophie accepts that narrative completely. She's like, oh, that does describe the situation. That explains the facts. I guess I'm being exploited. And then we get all that fellow feeling with Calcifer later on. But when we reunite with Fanny at the end, Fanny has put on the hat that Sophie made that is going to marry money, and accordingly she has married money, and she is happy and she is beautiful and she is delighted to see Sophie again. When they meet, she is so overjoyed to see that Sophie's okay, and also it's clear that she was heartbroken when Sophie went off and disappeared. She blamed herself. She said, it's overwork, it's all my fault. But Sophie looks at Fanny and understands her, and I do find it so touching. She saw that Fanny was afraid that she would be just like Sophie, old, for no reason, with nothing to show for it. And it's Sophie's experience of being old that gives her such sympathy for all these older women in the book, going, what am I going to be when I'm done being a very unhappy teenage girl?
Yeah.
What are the options?
I do think there's something like the moment when Howl moves back into Sophie's old house is so interesting and so nuanced, because it's really uncomfortable for Sophie. But like, she's like, oh, this is the place that I was unhappy, but that I grew up and that I knew really well. and now I moved back here and it's changed. It's not the same, and I'm not the same. But at the end of the book, there's no, like, she's going to stay there, because I think that's a reflection of the fact that, like, we are coming close to the point where at the end of the book, Sophie has to turn back from being an old woman into being a young girl. She has to find a way to come back to the person that she was while being changed, while being this new person that she has become by living with Howl. And that is all metaphorized by going back to the old hat shop and being like, all right, we've transformed it. We sell flowers now. We live here together. I have this new reputation as Aunt Jenkins is what she's going by in the hat shop, actually. She's decided she doesn't want to be Hal's mother anymore. Now she's his old aunt, which obviously that's going to change when they get married, as they will at the end of the book. But it is like, it's a return to the self. It's an understanding of the self but transformed and reconfigured, and sort of it's a very uncomfortable process for her, but a necessary process. So it is a romantic gesture, even though she doesn't think of it as one at first. Like, he does have to come, they do both have to come live in Sophie's house.
I think you're right that the reconciliation with Fanny has to happen then, and that recognition of Fanny, because, I mean, when she's young, she thinks of Fanny as being not an old woman, but like an older woman. And then when she's old, she's like, oh, Fanny's actually quite young and pretty. Reading between the lines of this book, Fanny, at the end of the book, is probably in her late 30s, if that, because it said that that Sophie's father marries his youngest shop assistant, a pretty blonde girl. And at the end of it, she has, a 15-year-old daughter, and then, a 17 and 18-year-old stepdaughters. And she probably was quite young when she got married. And so she's probably, quite a young woman. And Sophie is generously 18 and about to marry a 27-year-old. Like, she is going through the same steps that Fanny went through, just in a different situation.
Yeah, we need that recognition, and we need that reconciliation. And we need Sophie to have been Howl's old mother, I guess, before she can be his 18-year-old
I mean,
wife.
like, if you're looking at it, then Letty and Sullivan is probably much more of an age gap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't know how old he is. He could just be prematurely craggy.
Although I will say that Sophie and Howl do seem to be about the same maturity level, tantrum-wise. I mean, presumably he went and caught a falling star and then, like, stopped emotionally developing whenever he did that. So, it's not...
We know when it was. It was 5 years ago, so he was, like, 24 at the time. But speaking of tantrums, we do have to talk about Sophie's big tantrum.
Well, no, if it was 5 years ago, he was 22, because we know he's 27.
Oh, yes, you're right. Sorry, I was doing my 10,000 days math wrong.
Yeah, because we know he was 22. And, so he was 22. So, and, he PhD student. And, it's a very similar age gap between Fire and Hemlock, but it's just done appropriately in that they are allowed to interact while adults.
Yes. Adults plus, you might even say. But I think it's really interesting about, so the Sophie's tantrum, after they've moved into the new house, comes when it becomes obvious that everybody knows that she's in love with Howl. She's mad about everything that's happening. She's mad about sort of being, I think it's becoming clearer both what has happened to Howl and that Howl kind of knows what's going on with her. He's moved her into her old house. He's made this bay of flowers for her. It's making her feel very weird. So she's trying to make, it's right after Miss Angorian comes in, and she's still madly jealous of Miss Angorian.
But also the suit. We haven't talked about the suit.
Right, yes. Sophie has been... Go for it.
No, yeah, so early on, Sophie, when she's banging around Hal's house finding things to do, Hal, to stop her, gives her an old suit of clothes of his, and is like, that's in pieces, mend it. How you must love servitude, he says. But Sophie, who you remember, is a genius with clothes, does it. She fixes this suit, and once it's repaired, Hal looks at it and says, you've given this a new touch. It's got a little more style now. Mm-hmm. And of course she has, because she was talking to it the whole time she was mending it, which is how Sophie does magic. At the time, she didn't realise she was doing magic, but she was saying, oh, built to pull in the girls, aren't you? So Hal is wandering around with a sexy spell sewed into his outfit and having a great time. But Sophie is not pleased. Once she realizes what she's done, there's a whole panic, like, oh no, this is very unethical, I've got to get those clothes off him. Have you, my dear? Have you, my dear? So she goes through a series of comedy chaos events designed to try and get Hal out of the enchanted suit and into his other one. At which point, Hal decides he's going to Mrs. Pentstemmon's funeral. He transforms all his clothes into black, and then Sophie doesn't know which one he's wearing. And there's a whole thread through like the final third of the book, which is Sophie like, I've done it to myself. I am under the spell of the sexy spell I put on his clothes, and that is why I'm having these problems.
Yes.
And then, right at the moment when she realizes everyone knows, she demands Hal shows her which suit the black one really is, and it's not the enchanted one. She's just into him, and she's so angry.
Yep. But it is...
And the angriness that she has manifests as something explicitly designed to destroy the romantic gesture that he made to her.
Yep.
He's like, I will give you flowers. She's like, I will give you weed killer.
But she does it when she has a bowl of like ferns and like, you know, like normal plants, and she's crouching over the plants going, beat daffodils in June, beat daffodils in June, and that turns them into weed killer because she's trying to turn them into something they're not. And then she goes and weed kills her way down, and that's when the dog man says, I arrived far too late, and she's furious, and she goes back and picks a fight with Hal. But the thing she picks a fight with him about is not, you were listening on this conversation and you know that I'm in love with you. They both know it at this point. The thing she picks a fight about is, you knew I was under a spell. You knew I wasn't secretly 90. They don't say anything about the fact that at this point, I think they both know that the feelings are kind of mutual. Like, that they don't argue about it at all. And
I don't think Sophie quite knows yet. Like, I think on one level she does, but Sophie is the queen of projection and defense mechanisms, and like that's why she was so attached to the idea of the suit being enchanted. Like, she's like, of course it was something else, it wasn't me. And I think she is still stuck, and in romance parlance, she is still stuck in her core wound, which is, I am the oldest, I'm a failure. And that allows her to believe right up until almost the very end in the story that Howl is telling her about, I'm in love with another woman. And this is a Mr. Rochester thing as well. He's like, I will allow you to believe that I'm in love with someone else because it's funny. But also because he's like, oh, I was relying on you being too jealous to let her into the castle. Nonsense. You could have just told her.
Yes.
But
You enjoy seeing her
I think,
but also this is Hal doing defense stuff as well.
Internal narration, is still, oh, he must love Miss Angorian very much, because she recognizes that the romance promise that was set up very early in the book is being fulfilled. And the romance promise is, you will know he's in love when he doesn't spend 2 hours in the bathroom putting spells on his face and his hair. And as soon as that happens on the page, you know as a reader that we are going to get the payoff of this.
Yes.
This is something that's been put up on the shelf, and it's going to get knocked down, and it's going to be very satisfying. And it gets set up, it gets knocked down, and Sophie goes, oh, he must love Miss Angorian very much. And I think part of her still believes that.
Yes, true.
Part of her does not. Part of her does know. I think you're right, from the weed killer moment, that it is mutual, but she can't move on from the story she's telling herself about how much of a failure she is, and so she can't let herself truly believe that Hal loves her.
Yes.
So she's got to keep the 90-year-old disguise on, and she's got to keep her belief in her defense mechanisms going until she literally can't any longer, and it happens in the wind of being honest.
Yes.
And she recognizes it in Hal. She's like, he is finally being honest about himself. And that is what forces her to finally be honest about what she knows about his feelings for her.
So what happens at the end? Because everyone, the witch clearly believes that she is successfully seduced. Well, no, the witch doesn't believe it. The witch sets it up as a trap for Sophie. The witch knows what is going on. But the witch basically says a fake announcement. I have kidnapped Miss Angorian, and Hal must come to rescue Miss Angorian. And Sophie's like, oh no, Hal will never forgive me for letting harm come to Miss Angorian. I must go myself and rescue her. And then as soon as he gets there, the witch is like, great, I've kidnapped Hal's true love, and now he's going to have to come and rescue you. And all of this happens in maybe 3 pages. This is over with like that. Sophie gets there. The witch is like, I'm so tired. I've spent this whole book watching you play out this love story in which I'm barely involved. You're still old for some reason. I don't know. I guess Howl is coming and I'll take his head and make my perfect man. And Howl gets there and the fight is over in 10 seconds because the real fight is with Miss Angorian, the fire demon. And having rescued Sophie, Howl and Sophie run back, and Howl explains the plot of the book in plain language, a thing he has been congenitally incapable of doing for the past 280 pages. And this, you're right, is when Sophie knows inarguably that they are mutually in love. This is the moment of crisis, and we know that this has happened because right when we get back, we start seeing her hair. She notices that her hair is red again. She sort of half notices that her hair is red again because she's very busy thinking about other things. But that's the signal that the spell is off because she doesn't need it anymore.
No, the moment it is described as fair and red again is the moment when she is returning Howl's heart to him. She has literally got her hands on his heart and her hair is falling around her in reddish fair hanks, and like that's the moment her narration realizes what has happened to her, and it's because she is at a point where she has his heart in her hands. She cannot argue with the story she's in anymore.
And we were told at the beginning of the book what kind of world Ingary is. It's a world where metaphors are true. They are literal, they are going to happen. Everything is real. And Sophie puts Howl's heart back in his chest for him after having her heart in her hands, and lets the part of his heart that is Calcifer be free, and it comes back to them.
It is very cute. It's a very cute ending. We started this season with Magicians of Caprona, which is Diana Wynne Jones's, I think, first attempt at doing comedy, and it doesn't quite work. This is a perfect rom-com.
Yes. Yeah.
It's lovely. It's just delightful.
And I said one of the things that I love about Diana Wynne Jones is that she knows when to end a story. And you're right, like the climax happens very fast. It's very chaotic. The entire last page is just different people yelling lines of dialogue that Sophie is barely noticing because she's in love and holding hands and smiling. And then Calcifer comes back, the end, boom, done. I remember hitting that as a reader and being like, oh my God, you mean you don't have to like mess around in an epilogue for ages? And this is why epilogues in romance still kind of annoy me, because like, no, just end it as soon as humanly possible. And that means you capture it at the moment of the highest joy.
Yes.
And the moment of highest joy of that book is that like distilled chaos. And the happy ever after has been said as a word. And then Calcifer comes back, boom, and like the heart has returned to the house.
Yes.
That has to be the moment the book ends, because like that's the only image you can end it on.
Yeah, it's so good. I love this book so much.
Yeah. It's a book. Yeah. I everything to do with Calcifer, I think, really stuck with me. And like there is a scene in the book that I have coming out.
Yeah, can you talk about your house book?
In the outline was called "This is the Calcifer Moves House" scene, because that's how I was envisaging it the entire time. Yeah.
Tell us about your house book.
Tell us about your house book, Freya.
Ooh, my house book. So my house book, in retrospect, is an enormous mishmash of a great deal of things from Howl's Moving Castle. But the reason it can be that is because Howl's Moving Castle has a lot of fairy tale in it, and especially does have quite a bit of Cinderella in it, kind of sidelong. So this is a novella which is a Cinderella retelling called Cinder House. And the way I sold it to myself when I started writing it, and the way I have been describing it, is it's a gothic romance in which the house, the girl, like the ingenue, and the ghostly secret at the heart of the house are all the same person. So it's a Cinderella retelling in which Cinderella is a ghost haunting her father's house. And this is why she can't leave. And there's that line of Calcifer's near the end that says, I don't mind so long as I can come and go. Because he is fighting his entrapment in the house the whole time. And to me, that was a really interesting desire, like a very interesting key motive for a character to have, which is I am trapped as the spirit of a house. What if I could come and go? And that is the driving impetus of Cinderella in Cinder House. And I won't spoil too much of what happens, but there is a Calcifer moving house scene.
It's really good, and everyone should get excited for it.
Right before we finish, because we ought to wrap up, because we have run over by so much, but
so much time.
Busy old fool unruly Sophie.
Yeah.
I think we need a moment for busy old fool unruly Sophie, because Song by John Donne is the curse, but it is not the only Donne moment in the book. There is also a moment one of many, many moments when Sophie is causing chaos in Howl's house, which is Howl's heart, and Howl turns to her and goes, "Busy old fool, unruly Sophie," which is a quotation from a John Donne poem, because Howl, when he is not being the evil Wizard of Ingery, is a PhD student working on charms and spells, so presumably a medievalist with extensive reading in English literature. He is quoting The Sun Rising by John Donne, which is an absolutely beautiful poem about, "Go away, sun, me and my lover are having a great time, don't bother us." You guys were talking about it ahead of the time, and how the poem moves from "go away, sun" to "get in my bed, son."
Yep.
And Hal's quote to Sophie is so romantic. That's Hal brings different texts into Ingery. That's not my point. That's Becca's point. But she's right.
Yes.
How in this world that is governed by stories, Hal is bringing the stories of his own world in with him, fluttering through the window on old photocopies.
And some of them are very sexy poems.
And this one is sexy.
I think that, this is a children's book. It's not a sexy book, but there is a little bit of it in there, and I think it's coming in through the John Donne. And I think it's Diana showing her hand as to the, she's always building a world out of stories. And this, this is how she shows her hand as to what stories are in this book. It's really good. This would be a really lovely note to end the season on. But we have one more book in this season, which is Tale of Time City, which is what we'll be doing next week.
Which is one of the ones I have never read.
Oh, it's an interesting one. Add it to your very expensive list of books you need to import to Australia.
I've got them all now.
Oh, yes!
I'm trying to show you, the entire last shelf and a half of my bookshelf is now my Diana Wynne Jones collection.
Good.
And all of the two from the 80s that I haven't read are The Time of the Ghost and Tale of Time City.
Read Time of the Ghost. What a book. But Tale of Time City, I'll tell you what.
As they come up on the podcast.
Nice. 80s theme, time, memory, and storytelling. I think I'm going to draw a circle around that and end the episode here.
Thank you so much for joining us. It was such a treat to have you.
No, it was wonderful. Like every other episode, I will be sitting there being like, I have things to say as well. So you do.
Then say them to us. Come back and talk to us about it.
And so it was very nice to be like, I can be on it and say the things I have to say.
Wonderful. All right, well, we will let you go to bed because it's quite late in Australia. And I have to go because it's quite early here and go to work. But this was a delight. Thank you, guys.
Thank you all very much.